Okay. Just making some rounds right now, sending out some messages to everyone. It's right there. Okay. Boom. Oh, hey, Catherine. How you doing? Goodness gracious. I couldn't even see that you were in here. Man, I'm so sorry. Okay, wait a minute. Now let's do a live chat. Excellent. Okay. I was wondering if you'd be able to revisit the video or is it only available for the live? Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yes, Catherine, you should be able to revisit the video. I will actually post up a recording so that way you all can actually go back over it. I will, at some point in time during tonight's YouTube live session, I will go over some tips and tricks on really some strategies on how to compose your essay. This first essay that's actually due this Sunday for the critical memoir. And I'll also kind of go over some of the PowerPoints as well. So because I'll be, kind of going over some information, some strategies and some tips and tricks, tidbits and things like that that might help you to write your essay. I'm going to make it available on Canvas too as well. But this is the only time that you will be able to ask me questions. That's the thing. That's the hook. If you want to actually interact and dialogue, this is the place for you to be. But again, of course, I understand this is a, like I mentioned in my video this past weekend, it's a difficult time. 6 o'clock, right around dinner. I know folks got to put kids to bed, get them fed, bath, and all of that stuff. And we might be the kids too, so in that case. But I will actually make the video and the recording of everything that I do here available later. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. How was it logging on and like the process of like getting here? Was it difficult? Like, was it, kind of a few hiccups here and there? Is there anything that I could possibly do better? I'm looking to kind of do this with some form of regularity, at least like once a week. Again, just to make sure that we actually have a forum online just for us to dialogue and, for us to just really, take some time out, have a space where you can have some interaction with your instructor rather than just, communicating via email. Oh, great. Cool. Cool. Excellent. Great. Good. Yeah. I was looking to make this as easy as possible. Excellent job. Okay. Heck yeah. Cool. So then you know what? Catherine, do you have any questions or anything that you'd like for me to go over? We can kind of treat this as like a glorified office hours session. As a matter of fact, kind of like office hours with CAG. I guess that would be the way to go. Yeah, I guess I can kind of call it that, right? Like office hours with CAG. I will also pull up our module, and then let me see if I can do the cool thing and like kind of share my screen. Let me see here. Oh, oh, yes. Turns out I can share my screen. Excuse me. Excuse me. Ooh, excuse me. I'm so sorry, folks. I promise these are not tears of joy. we go. Shit. Okay. Okay. All right. Oh, so sorry, Catherine. There's a weather change that's triggering my allergies. It's causing my sinuses to drain. It may look like I'm crying. It may look like I'm sad. My apologies, but I promise I'm neither. I'm just slightly and silently choking. My apologies for that. Okay. Questions? boy, oh boy. Absolutely, Catherine. I got you as my voice kind of returns back to normalcy. Um, okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can view my screen that I'm sharing. Hey, Azel. Okay, cool. Excellent. That's great. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, great. So that means that y'all can actually see me on Canvas right now. So I want you all, you can just kind of follow along with what I'm doing. Again, Azel, just for kind of context, this is my first time doing a YouTube live. I promise, even though I was born in the 1900s, I'm somewhat relatively familiar with how technology works. I am completely unfamiliar with how this technology works in the YouTube space. So I can't even see if you're seeing what I'm seeing, and I can't see what it is that y'all are seeing. So bear with me. Give me some instructions in the chat if there's something that's kind of off, or if there's something that's just kind of out of whack. um yeah, totally my apologies if there is. But I'm kind of winging it on the fly here, so I'm actually doing some YouTube live experiments. Okay, wait, no. Now I can see. Now I can see. Okay, cool, great, excellent. All right, so you all can see uh week 1, week 2, and then week 3 on, let me go to the student view, Canvas. And don't worry about if this is the right section or not. I'm not sure if that's a concern of yours, but just as a heads up, most of my course modules all look the same in terms of how they're structured. Um, but just FYI, and in case anybody was actually wondering. So, okay, let's hop right on into this narrative here. Okay, so I know that for many of you, this is your first time doing a narrative, right? So the most difficult part of writing an essay in general has to be, well, no, sorry, excuse me, it doesn't have to be this, but what my students have actually shared with me over the years while I've been teaching is, and you can tell me if I'm hot, warm, or cold with this, the most difficult part of essay writing is getting started, right? um, so let's talk about how to get started. Okay. See, I got a witness right here. Yeah, definitely, right? Excellent, excellent. So, well, okay. So let me just kind of frame this for you all, and also reveal a little bit about who I am and the kind of how that influences my teaching. Um, I am one of those instructors who believes, especially in an online class, that the if you get confronted with a problem, walk with me here, okay? I'm going to give a very big metaphor, and I don't want you to get scared that I'm going to lose you. Just stick with me, okay? If you get let's kind of do some guided fantasy right quick, okay? Take a deep dive into our mind's eye. If you get confronted with a problem that's too tall to get over, too low to get under, and too wide and expansive to get around, and too thick and dense to bust through, then what do you do? Right? It's just quite simply my abstract way of describing a problem that's inescapable, right? Kind of like this essay. Well, um, sure, there are a lot of inventive, crafty, creative things, right, that we can kind of think of and even imagine for, how we can kind of, resolve this particular problem. However, there's just one that I want to highlight for you all that is most applicable for this essay for any kind of writing situation, right? And for kind of getting over the hump of the most difficult part of the writing process, getting started, right? If you need a tangible kind of example to ground that abstract metaphor in, think about that problem getting started with the essay, right? That's the problem that's too tall, too low, too wide, too expansive, right? And too thick and dense to bust through. Well, the best way to actually solve any problem that's designed in that kind of massive nature is to break it down into something that's more useful, right? Or to break it down into something that's more manageable, right? And so when it comes to the writing process, that's actually what I've had you all already start doing. How, you might be thinking, right? Well, if we take a look here at the discussion board number one, no, sorry, actually, let me back, take a step back just for a quick second. Sorry, before we even get into the essay number one, let's deal with the prompt first, and then I'm gonna go back to the essay, excuse me, to the discussion board number one. Okay, so let's do. There we go. Okay. All right. So hopefully you all are able to see this. Okay, so as I click on, okay, wait a minute. I realized something. Okay, okay. Let me see. Now, view tab, share this tab. Oh, I'm already sharing that tab. Okay, share this tab. Okay, great. Sorry, y'all. Again, I just really appreciate y'all y'all's patience right now as I'm kind of going through my struggles. I just figured out that I have to actually switch the controls, switch in order to switch tabs so that way you can view it. Okay, so let's start with the assignment prompt in and of itself. First and foremost, essay number one, critical memoir. This is going to be due September 29th. Oh, excuse me, sorry, September 28th. Oh, wow, that's the wrong date. It should be the correct date that's actually on. Yes, so on Canvas, this is the correct date. Okay. I'll go back and I'll actually revise that. So it should be September 28th, 2025. Okay. So you're going to submit this to turnitin.com, but the way, just as I described in my week three updates and announcements, I was able to integrate turnitin.com with our Canvas. So all you'll have to do in order to submit this essay is scroll right on down to the bottom of the assignment prompt itself, right? And all the way down here at the bottom, you should see I think it might actually ask you something about on your end. It'll ask you about like an agreement, right? Like a user agreement for turnitin.com. You can read through that at your leisure, summarize it on Chat GPT, just so that we have a clear understanding of what the user agreement is. And then you can, if you choose to accept, right, which I don't think that there should be any particular reason as to why or there's certainly nothing that you need to worry about or like be cautious of, I think, with the user agreement. But if so, please bring it to my attention so that way I can help you to navigate and troubleshoot through that. But once you click accept, then it should actually pop up for you. It should actually give you a prompt to upload your submission, right? And that's where at the bottom of the writing assignment prompt, you will upload your submission once you're finished. Don't type it on Canvas, type it on Microsoft Word or Google Docs, save it, and then upload what it is that you have saved. So that way you can always keep a backup in case anything should happen to Canvas in the middle of you writing your essay. Okay. All right. So that's how we submit. Let's take a look at the prompt. Memoirs are a kind of writing that's used to narrate and analyze significant experiences in our lives. In an essay of 3 to 5 pages, recall, retell, and analyze a specific event or even a series of related events in which you had to overcome an obstacle. The obstacle could be physical, mental, emotional, or even a specific person or even a group of people, right? That allowed you to begin your journey on the road to developing a growth mindset. Now, let's pause for a second and kind of dive back into our memory banks and think back to if you saw in week one the multiple intelligences video that was excuse me, it was actually a TED talk that was given by educational researcher Howard Gardner. And what Howard Gardner does is he's introducing his research and his work that's really focused on kind of disrupting the way that we as a public, right, a general public, um think about intelligence, right? Think about what counts as intelligence. See, for Howard Gardner, he wants to challenge the traditional, um, kind of commonplace, um, perception of how intelligence is quantified, right, and identified. Well, he actually argues that based on his research, he's discovered that really intelligence is really a matter of how people recognize patterns best, right? And the process by which people learn how to recognize patterns is usually governed through school and schooling. However, the problem with school and schooling and the way that they teach individuals how to recognize patterns is that their approaches to recognizing patterns, right? In other words, right, their approaches to learning don't actually fit, reflect, or even support the strengths that the individual students walk into the classrooms with. So, through his research, he was actually able to discover that there is not just one simple way of measuring intelligence, right? But rather that there are multiple ways of measuring and quantifying and identifying intelligences, right? So the way that schools recognize or quantify intelligence is typically through a standardized test that measures like their logical or verbal or even mathematical skills. The problem with that is that there are more ways and more ways to recognize patterns than just logical, verbal, and mathematic. Especially if you talk to an artist, right, like Picasso, right, or even like a Jean-Michel Basquiat, right? There's a variety of different ways in which individuals, right, recognize patterns. And so, what Howard Gardner actually did is through his research, he identified eight multiple intelligences. And in identifying those multiple intelligences, what he was able to do was to carve out yet a new way that we can get people to transform the way that they think about intelligence and how people grow it or cultivate intelligence, right? In other words, what his discovery, what's so profound about Howard Gardner's discovery is that it introduces a new way for us, especially in this class, to understand how to change the way that we see ourselves and how we thus see the world around us. In other words, it introduces a way for us to transform our mindset, right? Or the way that we think about our own abilities, right? The fixed mindset suggests that our abilities cannot be changed. You may have heard this once or twice before, right? This is who I am. This is how I always have been, and this is how I'm gonna always be. I'm not finna change for nothing or nobody. I can't change. This here is just how I am, and you're gonna have to either choose to accept it or not. Right? When we hear that kind of language, right, that's a language that's affirming and even reinstantiating the fixed mindset, right? So it perceives one's abilities as being immutable, not changing. And as a result, what ends up happening is that we end up developing a defeatist mindset if there ever becomes a situation where we get confronted with a challenge that's too tall, too low, too wide, too thick, and dense to bust through, and that we can't get over. Instead, the growth mindset views one's abilities, right, and therefore one's capacity as being as capable of being transformed, as capable of growing, as capable of learning from one's mistakes. You see? So, in this way, the growth mindset is expansive when it comes to their self perception, how they see themselves and their intelligence, right? I want you in this essay here to think about a time in your life, right? It could have actually been like the day before you even enrolled in the classes, right? It could have actually been the part in your life that got you to go to college. It could have been the point in your life where you had children and you needed to leave your old self behind in order to be there for your kids, right? It could be any number of a variety of different experiences that you have had, but I want you, this is going to be personal. This is going to be something that's very unique to your own struggle, your own story. I want you to recall what this essay here is asking us to do is to recall, retell, and to analyze an event or even a series of events, right? Where you began to transform the way that you see yourself and the world around you, right? In other words, where you made your transformation from a fixed to a growth mindset. You see, that's the general overall gist of this particular essay, right? That's exactly what I'm asking you to do. Without even reading anything else, that's the thing that I'm telling that I'm telling you about, right? That I want for you to write about in this essay. It's a story about a time in your life where you made the transformation from a fixed to a growth mindset. Okay. Now, let's kind of dive in a little bit further. Let me know how are y'all doing? Do you need me to kind of pause for a second? Do I need to go back and kind of clarify anything that I may have started on? Give me a thumbs up if you're doing okay out there. Okay. Okay. Cool. 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 All right. So we've got the general gist. Perfect. Excellent. Let me ground the general gist in a concrete example for you. Okay. Again, I'm one of those instructors who believes that, right, a problem that's too tall, too low, too wide, too thick, right, is best addressed by breaking it down into smaller parts. So here's an example of the kind of essay that you're going to write. The RZA's Tao of Wu, the introduction and pillar number one. Those are two of the most important chapters or sections in the book. Why? Because in it, the RZA is talking about, he's describing who he is and where he's from, especially in that introductory chapter. He describes who he is by describing where he's from. So he's giving you background and he's setting the scene for the events that actually follow, right? He also, that particular intro actually ends with an explanation of how he discovered the thing that he wanted to do for the rest of his life, right? So he talks to you about the challenges and the obstacles that he faced, right? Getting robbed the first week that they moved into the projects, right, by somebody who turned out to end up becoming his friend, right? And he had to kind of negotiate whether or not he wanted justice, or if he felt like it wasn't even really all that worth it, right? And boom, should he actually just kind of keep a friend? He talks about how there was crime, there was drugs, right, in his environment. He was kind of surrounded by it, but yet and still he was able to somehow, some way, particularly through the relationship that he built, through the covering that he was able to experience from his mother, through the relationship that he ended up developing with his uncle Hollis, right, who ended up becoming one of his first guides and mentors. He was able to, in a sense, navigate his way very carefully through the dangerous minefield that was the neighborhood that he grew up in, right? And he talks about how, in sitting down with his uncle and also to his friend Chili Wop, right, who was the one who was about to actually rob him. even his cousin, the Jizza, right, or Gary. He talks about how these individuals here have all been kind of planted throughout his journey, right, at different points in his life, and how they gave him something, right? They gave him a tidbit of knowledge, a tidbit of wisdom, right? In a sense, the entire book could be called the Book of Wisdom, and it would still be applicable. But he talks about how he got a lot of information from these guides and from these mentors who were surrounded by him, who had surrounded him in his life, that allowed him to transform the way that he thought about himself and the way that he saw the world, right? So the Riz's Tao of Wu, especially the intro and also pillar number one, function as good, clear, clean-cut examples of the kind of essay that you can write, right, for this particular assignment. It's the model that we can actually, that you all can use in order to structure, right, your own narratives, okay? So in this kind of way, what we're looking at here, I just wanted to kind of ground that the general gist in that particular example, right? The example of the Riz's Tao of Wu from the introduction, and also to pillar one, just so that way we can have at least a sense of, okay, well, what are we doing here, and what's the end product kind of look like, right? If we know what the end goal kind of looks like or have an idea of it in mind, then we can work our way backwards, right? So speaking of working our way backwards, let me go back to an earlier point that I made about what happens in my approach for what to do when you get confronted with a problem that's massive, right? So you break it down into something that's more manageable. Well, the thing that I wanted to actually do for you all is to make this essay here a lot more manageable. So as you can see here in the second paragraph of the prompt, it says, using your response from the discussion board number 2 personal statement chart, what you can do here is you can work to establish the narrative, the setting of your narrative, and you can also identify which conflicts it is that you've been confronted with that you had to overcome in order to make the transformation from a fixed to a growth mindset, right? So some of the questions that are on the personal statement chart, let's take a look at it right here, ask you to divide up into 3 different columns, right? Your past, present, and future. Well, the topics that I want you to expand and elaborate on in your past are concepts like your upbringing, family, community, your family's educational history, right? Topics that I wanted you to actually consider and develop or expand on from the present, ask you to consider, what current crisis are you in? What kinds of distractions are present in your life? I should say your life, not you life, right? And then also too, right, from the future, what are your ultimate career goals, and how will this course, do you imagine, right, help you to achieve your ultimate goals? Okay. The reason why I had you all start with, or excuse me, write this discussion board topic, right on this discussion board topic, is because it works as a way for you all to generate some ideas for your essay, for writing assignment number 1. You can take any one of these ideas here and use it as the starting point for your writing assignment number 1, right? So let me give you an example. If one of the, maybe I might not want to necessarily do like a current crisis. Maybe I want to do a crisis from the past, right? That's available. That's fine, right? That's perfectly fine. You can certainly choose whichever crisis it is that you want to actually kind of highlight how you overcame in order to make the transformation from a fixed to a growth mindset. Okay. So like, take, for example, let's say that my current crisis that I'm in is that, I have absolutely no clue what I wanted to do, or, I could actually recall a time in my life, right, where I had no clue as to what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, right? I went into college as a biological sciences major, in my undergrad as a biological sciences major. I got through all of my general education courses. And once I actually completed all those courses, I ended up having to take all my major courses. So here's the current crisis, right? Let me retell and recall for you all, right, a time in my life where I had to make the transformation from a fixed to a growth mindset. Let me tell you about how I ended up discovering how I learn best, and thus how I ended up discovering what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Sophomore year of my undergrad career, my first quarter, I went to a school that was on quarter systems. I had to take chemistry, biology, physics, or rather a geology class that masqueraded as a physics class, and then also a calculus class, right? This was a second series calculus class. I had 4 classes in 10 weeks that I had to get through. Um, Not the way that I would suggest anybody ever taking courses. Do not stack chemistry, biology, physics, and calculus class all in one quarter or even one semester. It was the worst bit of advice that I ever received from my counselor. Okay. However, I kept failing all of the quizzes and the exams that we take. So, part of what I wanted to do after failing my second midterm, which all but guaranteed that I got an F in the class, I came back to my apartment. Thought to myself, I'm like, man, you know, I'm just really not cut out for college. This here is it. They're going to kick me out of school. I'm going to make the dean's list, not the one that you send to your mom's house so that way you could put up on your refrigerator. They're going to send me a on the dean's list to as a subject to dismissal. Man, I have no clue what I want to actually do. So I hopped on AIM, right? For those of you back in the day, it was DM before DM. Okay, it was AOL Instant Messenger. All right, folks. This here is way back in the day. So I hopped on AIM, and what ended up happening was I got a message from a former teacher of mine. She happened to be my fourth, seventh, and eighth grade teacher, and what she told me was, or I talked to her. She asked me. She said, "Hey, Dame, how's college going?" I said, "Oh man, it's going. It's a struggle. I'm failing all my classes. I'm taking all my major courses. I have absolutely no clue what the heck is going on in these classes. Oh my goodness." Okay. She said, "Well, are you getting tutoring?" I said, "Yes, I'm forming my own study groups. I'm doing all these things, right?" There's a dialogue that we're kind of having back and forth through AIM. And so I told her I was thinking about changing my major. And I said, "I'm thinking about changing my major to sociology." She said, "That's cool, but let me just put a word of advice out there for you, right? Sociology, while it's a great major, oftentimes tends to be an impacted major, meaning that there's just a lot of students who also want to become sociologists, right? Who want to kind of, get the degree. It might take a longer time for you to complete those courses. Why don't you think about becoming an English major?" Now, what she didn't know was in my mind, when she said that, I said to myself, "Oh, I don't want to be stuck reading books and writing papers for the rest of my life. I got parties to go to. I'm low key the man on campus. I don't want to do that. Never." But because of who she was, I just politely kept my thoughts to myself and typed back, "Well, I mean, that sounds like a good idea, but I don't know what I'm going to actually do with an English degree." Then she started listing out all these things that you can do with an English degree. She said, "Oh, heck, well, you can actually go into public relations, you can go into advertisement and design. You can even work for the Department of Defense, who was specifically looking for English majors." Right? She said you could become a lawyer, you could even possibly teach, all right? She's putting that out there. You can become a writer, right? You can become a publicist. There's all these different things that you can do with it. And so she kind of went super hard in the paint, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, huh, wow, she's actually making a really good case right now for becoming an English major." because we've developed such a strong kind of relationship, right? I mean, she was my fourth, seventh, and eighth grade teacher at the small elementary school that I went to. I said, you know what? Let me try it. Just because she said it, let me try it, give it a whirl. She's doing a good job, right? She's selling this to me. Huh. So I go over and I talk with the English counselor, and she sees that I've already taken all my GEs and that I'm kind of sort of far along, right? In terms of like my GE courses, like they're all done. I'm only able to take my major courses now, right? Which I would later come to find out that that's actually not true. I hadn't waited too long, right? But that's a story for another day. She said, "Yeah, well, you know, really, you you really need to take all your math and science classes, and we really don't let folks into the English major at this particular time, like, who are this far along in their GE classes and things like that. But you know what? I'll give you one shot. If you take this class right here, you got to get a B or higher, then we'll accept you into the English major." I can probably write a whole story on how wrong she was. Everything that she told me was wrong, right? I can write like it was actually pretty messed up. But this is how they used to do students back in the day, right? And some people might even still do students, right? It's a crime. It's a crying shame if any counselors actually, kind of says this to students now. So the real reason why I never wanted to become an English major is because I did not like British literature. I didn't. It was impossible for me to identify with British literature. Shakespeare, I kind of put him in a different category, in a different class altogether, because he was one, cool, two, Tupac's favorite poet, and three, had that very, very cool movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and John Leguizamo that came out in like the late 90s that was extremely well done, and it had a completely modern take on it. If you have not seen it, certainly recommend that you watch. I don't think it's Kenneth Branagh's Romeo and Juliet. I forget who the director was, but it's the Romeo and Juliet version with John Leguizamo and Leonardo DiCaprio. Very cool, right? So I put Shakespeare in a completely different category, but all the other folks, I'm like, I did not enjoy Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I did not love Frankenstein. Those are all boring to me. Like, oh my gosh, I had no way to kind of find my into the material. First class that she makes me take, 17th century restoration literature, which in and of itself was the reason why I did not ever want to become an English major, right? But let me tell you, when I walked in on to class on that first day, I'll never forget it because it seemed like the students and the professor who was speaking there, it seemed like they were speaking English, like the language English, but I couldn't understand a word that they were saying. It was like they were talking in a language that I could kind of sort of like. I think I understood like every fifth word, right? It was almost like a foreign language to me, but I recognized some of the words. It had to be English, but I didn't understand what they were saying. They were making all kinds of references like Homer's The Iliad, right? And Homer's Odyssey, and John Dryden's All for Love, right? And Christopher Marlowe, and all these people and works and resources that I had absolutely no clue about. So I'm looking around the class, I'm like, what are y'all talking about here? I don't get anything. Excuse me. Can you please repeat that and explain what is that you said? Is that English? Let me just tell you. I walked into that class knowing only three things: hip hop, comics, basketball. That was what I knew. That was what I was comfortable with, right? I was, not quite an expert, but, I can talk about those things with the best of them. All right. Let me tell you, I had to become friends with the TA who taught smaller sections in this very large course. right? I developed a relationship, a friendship with this TA, and I always made sure to stay in their office hours. I made sure I went started visiting them regularly to ask questions about what I didn't understand in the text. Not only was I going to visit the TA's office hours, I was also going to visit the professor's office hours every single week. I would show up, knock on his door. His name was Professor George Haggerty. I absolutely love him. He was certainly a great professor. Certainly one of my most fun professors too, as well. He was like very excited about the literature, right? This 18th century restoration literature, and he had a way of explaining everything in this kind of funny, it was just funny to me, right? He was quite the character, at least in my eyes. And so that made my interactions with him a lot easier. So we would sit down, I would go over, pieces that I read from the text. We would go back and forth in office hours. And, long story short, I ended up ultimately, right, through a few series of visits to the office hours, right? By making friends with the TA, by forming my own study groups, and also too by being pretty consistent in my reading, right? For the most part, I was able to actually pass that class with a B. I got into the English major. And soon after that, I ended up getting accepted into the number one composition and rhetoric school in the nation. A few years after that, it took me a few years to actually develop my skills with writing and with critical reading and with making connections between the word and the world, right? What was happening all around me, right? In order to make sense of these texts, whether they be contemporary, right? Whether they be ancient or whether they even be kind of classical texts. I worked very hard at critical analysis and critical thinking and being able to articulate my thoughts and my ideas in writing, right? And so, in that way, thank you, Jojo. I appreciate that, right? And so, in that way, I was able to transform completely the way that I saw myself and the entire world around me. This is my journey on how I became an English major, right? And so, I wanted to just kind of share that little anecdote with you all because if I'm writing this essay, that's the story I'm going to tell, right? Exactly how I told it to y'all. Now verbalizing it is a lot different from actually writing it on out, right? Here's where I would start. First and foremost, I would start by writing an outline. Okay. So for the most part, a lot of you give me a thumbs up if you know how to write an outline. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you know how to write an outline. Excellent. Okay, good. So, excellent. Okay, great. So, in case you don't know how to write an outline, let me see here. I am going to send y'all a link right quick. There should be a link that just popped up in the chat for a YouTube video on how to write an outline. Now, see, here's the most important thing. So, remember how I told y'all I only knew three things when I walked into that English class, right? Hip hop, comics, basketball. Okay. See, I was really, really, really well versed at hip hop. And I mean, not just hip hop like rap songs, like I just had a ton of them memorized in my head. I certainly did, but there was way more than just songs that I had memorized in my head. There was what the songs were saying, the messages of the songs, right? The background and personal lives and histories of these artists and things of that sort, right? So that enabled me to be able to make connections with any text that I read because people always that we would get confronted characters in the text would always remind me of a kind of it would always remind me of a rapper, right? And so part of what I ended up discovering was for myself that there's a set of practices that MCs specifically engage with that I could actually use because at the time, while I did not consider myself an MC, I certainly considered myself a burgeoning poet. I had a way with words and writing them that allowed me, that was um, it garnered me some recognition. Um, and so there were certain techniques that I was familiar with. One technique in particular was this technique, right, called the outline. Now, writing an outline, folks, is actually the foundation of your essay, right? When you write an outline, it's just a series of topics, right? Just a series of topics. You actually don't want the words in your outline. You don't want any more than 3 words to describe each section of your outline. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can actually find like a little bit of an example here. Let's see. Let's do like a sample outline. So you don't want anything more than just like kind of 3 words your to describe your outline. And when you have just a few words to describe your outline, excuse me, to fill in your outline, what you're able to do is you're able to write. That is to say, this is the part that connected with hip hop for me very well. You're able to freestyle. That is to say, through the spontaneous expression of the first idea that comes to the top of your head, you can express your story. You can articulate your story. Okay. So here, let's actually go back. Whoops. Okay, let me share this one instead. Okay, great. Yes. So here, let me go back, right? And I'm going to go narrative structure number 2, PowerPoint. And I'm going to show you what an outline looks like of this essay. Let's give it a second to load here. Okay, yes, document is still processing. Please try again. All right, let's try to hit the refresh button. Hmm. There we go. Now it's loading. Perfect. Okay, so we're gonna scoot right on down here to the bottom. This is an outline of exactly what your essay, how your essay should be structured. That is to say, how the ideas, right, and the events should be organized and arranged. So, what I was able to do is, right, by combining the skill of outlining with the technique or the practice of freestyling, I would actually, every single time I sat down to write an essay, right? Um, I'm speaking about essay writing in general, but this here is most applicable for this essay, especially because it's a narrative and because you are the experts in your own story or of your own story. So nobody knows your story better than you. There is absolutely not one thing. I want you all to take some pride in this. I cannot tell you what in your story is right or wrong at all. You're the experts. So, in a lot of ways, the story that you tell will end up actually teaching me, the instructor, about who you are, where you come from, and also how things got to be this way for you. Right. So, your first step in terms of breaking down the overall problem, right? The very large problem of how to write this essay is to write an outline. That's your first step in the writing process, outlining, right? When you write an outline, you want to create, at least for this essay, 3 sections, right? Here you have, right, and they're represented by these big blocks, okay? 3 sections. The title is exactly what it is. You need a title, okay? Every single essay needs a title. The title always does the work of summarizing the thesis statement or the central idea, right? In other words, the main message that your essay is going to be about, right? The lesson that you ended up actually discovering for yourself. That's what your title should be. Okay. So I have it as big as all the other sections in the paper because it's that important, right? So that's more so just to kind of highlight its importance rather than to designate it as a section of the essay, right? So you have the intro, that's section one. Section two is the body paragraph. Section three is the conclusion, right? I would write three major sections, right? Roman numeral one, Roman numeral two, Roman numeral three. Intro, body, conclusion. Now, in it, I would actually designate capital letter A, background, right? That is to say, let's go back. Oh my goodness, look at this. You already have something on your background right here. If you did discussion board number two, your upbringing, your family, the community that you grew up in, I want you to describe it in such a way that I could feel it, taste it, smell it, hear it, and see it. Okay. I want you to describe where it is, all these things here in ways that I can actually experience it with you, right? You see, because your ability to do that, right, reflects your ability to start off your story and to create the first impression that your readers actually have in getting connected with your story. So background and setting, if you did discussion board number two, you've already got a good start on that. Okay. Now, the introduction to the conflict, right? So in the midst of this background and setting, right? Part of my background and setting, right, for the example that I gave you all earlier, right? I went to a high school that was focused on math and science. Why? Because I wanted to focus on becoming an ER physician. All my life, I wanted to become a doctor. Um, I really actually just wanted to help people, right? But doctors help people. Therefore, I wanted to become a doctor, right? So I would spend my summers volunteering in the ER room at local hospitals in all around LA. I even went to a high school for math, medicine, and science called King Drew Medical Magnet High School, right? And then after I graduated from King Drew Medical Magnet, then I went on into UC Riverside, had to take my GE courses, and that's when I began the road on the story that I shared with you all earlier, right? Now, I would actually describe that background, right? And the setting of where it is that, of where it is that I grew up. Many of you already got the example of this. If you saw, many of you already kind of know about this. If you read, I think I actually gave you a copy of my own memoir, my own version of this story. Here underneath week two. Oh no. No, sorry, not that one. Where did I give you guys that? Oh, sorry. Here it is. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Hip hop and narrative composition, right? So you all can actually see this in in my very own personal history statement. Here, I'm describing the background and the settings of where it is that I came from, right? This is my version, right? My story, my narrative, my critical memoir, my version of the essay that I'm asking you all to write. The students of King Drew Medical Magnet High School, located on the borderlands between Southeast Los Angeles, Compton, and Watts, come from the surrounding neighborhoods. My classmates survived amidst drug riddled street corners and government statistics that predetermined our lives as Black and Latino youth. Needless to say, every morning the sight of policemen in front of our school triggered old memories that blew our minds or blew our focus away from school and back to the blocks of our city streets. This was my everyday experience at one of the top magnet programs in LAUSD. The black bag, sheriff's bags, shotguns hoisted high over their shoulders became as common as the beige paint that coated our classrooms. Eventually, we grew numb not only to the police presence on our campus, but also to the spirit of curiosity and excitement that one would think characterizes one of the district's top performing schools. So it's in this way right here where I'm actually introducing the conflict, right? The conflict of the narrative itself. You see? So when let me switch back to outline. So here, right, as I'm saying this to you all, right? You want to describe the background, you want to describe the setting, you want to introduce the conflict, and that should actually set you up to introduce your central idea, right? Or the main message of the text. Now, in that memoir right there, I actually don't introduce the thesis statement or the central idea in that first paragraph. I leave off describing the introduction to the conflict. By the end of the essay, that's where the message becomes very clear, right? However, there's some subtle illusion I'm trying to generate, right? Or that I'm trying to create, right? With the title, Fire Before the Doorway, right? And this image of sheriffs hoisting shotguns over their shoulders, right? The sight of policemen triggering, right? There's a subtle, I'm trying to utilize, I'm trying to establish in the mind's eye of my readers here, right? A kind of image of this barrier before we actually arrive at the front door of our school, a place of safety, a place that's supposed to be safe, a place that's supposed to be where we can learn, a place where we're supposed to be able to grow, right? So it's in that kind of way that I'm that I want to highlight, kind of give you an example of how to illustrate the background, the setting, and then also to the introduction to the conflict, right? You want to actually start off because it orients. You want to start off in that way because it orients your readers into okay. Here's the environment. Here's the world that's happening right here in this that I'm about to embark upon, right? For this narrative, right? That's the most important way to introduce the central idea of a narrative, right? Is by establishing the background, the setting, and then also to introducing the conflict, right? Or what's the obstacle, right? See, for me in that story, the biggest obstacle was indeed the policeman, right? And the notion or the idea that we as young folks needed to be policed. I couldn't wrap my mind around that. It almost kind of distracted me from even wanting to go to school. All right. But now, right? See, when I set that up, now I'm able to dive into the key events that ended up transforming the way that I saw myself and the way that I saw the world around me. So let's take a look here. Okay. See, right now, here I'm going back to the kind of elaborate on I'm going back to kind of elaborate on the central idea that I'm communicating through the title in the next paragraph, right? So every morning, my friends and I would arrive to the sight of policemen walking out of the exit of the on-campus police station with shotguns, or as we called it, heat. Again, right, a reference back to the title. The presence of these officers, as well as the heat held before the doorway of our learning environment, did not signify our protection or our safety. However, it sought to implicitly rob us of our motivation and passion to attend high school and to further educate ourselves. Really, the presence of police on our campus suggested that as a predominantly Black and Brown student population, we were a threat and that our educational environment, as well as our very bodies, right, us, needed to be contained, policed, and restricted. Our school, in short, became our prison, right? So here I'm just kind of elaborating on the conflict itself because I really want for my readers to understand what's at stake here, right? And also too to understand what the importance is of freedom in a learning environment, right? Creating a sense of freedom, creating a sense of really welcoming, right? And also feeling like students should be there, right? Like they do belong, like they should belong, right, on this in this learning environment, right? I'll continue. Yet, police guards packing heat on campus is common for many inner city schools across the U.S. Arming police on school campuses erects psychological as well as physical barriers, right? There's going back to the title itself and elaborating on the conflict that function as a kind of preemptive strike to scare students before they even enter the classrooms into docile, unquestioning consumers of rules, models, and techniques. Such strategies interrupt the liberating potential, right, that lies at the heart of literacy enrichment and education, which in this sense leaves a lot of schools bankrupt, right? But this that didn't stop us. That didn't stop us at all from pushing beyond that blockade. Despite the psychological threat masked under the guise of safety, our classes continue to graduate with the highest rates of acceptances into four-year universities throughout LAUSD. It's this experience that's inspired me to pursue a lifelong goal of helping to educate the next generation. You see, for me, education is a process one undertakes to build upon what they've learned and must be enriched by opening the classroom to dialogue and interaction amongst teachers and students. Its goals, talking about the goals of education, should be to build upon previous knowledges, to make connections between past experiences and the academic information, ultimately to exchange knowledge and ideas with other peers in and be within and beyond their classroom, right? At the core of my so now here, right, I'm starting to kind of get into my teaching philosophy, right? At the core of my philosophy, right? Um, at the core of my philosophy and activity, right, is a belief in the potential of individuals to gain knowledge through active learning, thinking, and experimenting. See, the limitations of today's classrooms seem to invite more restriction rather than instruction for students. Teachers and students alike seem to forego the idea that learners are individuals who build knowledge through dialogue and through critical reflection, right? Okay. I want to pause for a very quick second and pull up another example that also helps to kind of summarize um, the events in a more concrete way. Okay. Let me see here now. Let me go back to YouTube. Hang with folks. I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second and then I'm going to share a new screen. There we go. There we go. Okay. Okay. So you all should be able to see a new screen, which is a document, right? Looks like an essay. Okay. So this here is another variation of that same essay. That's more of my teaching philosophy. This one here gets into the specific events, right? So here I go through kind of some of the same things. Um, oh, okay. Hold on. Let me see. Window, share. Why aren't you sharing? Hmm. There we go. Okay, yeah. Let me just. Hmm. mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excuse me. Sorry, bear with me. Excuse me. Sorry, folks. Give me just 1 second here. It looks like YouTube will only allow me to share, excuse me, to share files, or excuse me, windows or tabs that are open on YouTube. I mean, that are open in Google Chrome. So let me see if I can pull this other version of the essay up. Just 1 quick second here, folks. Thank you for your patience. Okay, let me do one more search. Okay, here we go. Sorry, folks. Okay. Absolutely, Isel. Absolutely. I'm just sorry that I'll have to actually sit and watch me kind of suffer with one eye tearing up and halfway choking throughout the presentation and having to kind of fumble through some examples, folks. I promise you, it won't be like this going forward. I will get better with each time that we actually try. Each time that we try to do these lives here. Okay. Okay. So this should pop up for y'all. Okay, great. Cool. All right. There we go. Okay, so here, right, kind of here you'll kind of see the essay kind of starts off a little bit differently, right? But not that much differently in terms of the overall gist, right? Like what you all actually saw was a kind of version for my teaching philosophy that I make available to you all. It's really my statement to you. Um, this example or this version here more so mirrors the kind of writing that you're doing. So I want to show this as like the kind of model. This is a better example or a better model of the kind of memoir that you all will be writing. It's more reflective of the kind of memoir that you'll be writing as opposed to a teaching philosophy. So I kind of pick up, right? Rather than presence, as students of color, right, we're the only group, right, to be trapped in such an intense matrix. Okay. So boom, right, constrained by the No Child Left Behind Act, NCLB. Teachers taught to achieve weekly standards. Teachers taught to achieve weekly standards and made little to no room for discussion or for engagement with our daily lessons, right? Learning was transformed into a kind of conditioning with strategies taught based on weekly standards, right? rather than on spontaneous discussion and discovery. However, we were lucky and fortunate. Police guards and jail cells on campus is not all uncommon for many inner city schools across the US. Arming police and school campuses erect psychological as well as physical barriers, right? You all remember that from the last version, right? That function as a kind of preemptive strike to scare students before they enter the classroom into docile and questioning consumers of rules, models, and techniques. Such strategies interrupt the liberating potential at the heart of expanding student literacies and nourishing a rich education. Thankfully, some teachers believed and put into practice the idea that learning was more than just district standards, right? So here now I'm transitioning, right? I'm shifting, right? With this last sentence here, this last sentence, thankfully, right? So here I'm describing this very grim, very bleak situation, right? That me and my classmates kind of find ourselves in, right? We're surrounded by police, right? The description is kind of fast, it's short sentences, it's medium sentences, right? It almost kind of mirrors, right, the feeling or the sentiment as you're reading along, that you're kind of trapped in between what's happening, right? And that's an effect that I was intentionally trying to create with my writing here, right? So that way, when I get to this last sentence, thankfully, right, that word thankfully provides some reprieve. I'm just giving you guys some insight. Not that you have to do this, but I'm just giving you all insight into my writing process, right? My thinking as I was writing this. Thankfully, rescues, right? It pulls us up from the muck and mire of everything, all this craziness that's going on. And it says, thankfully, right? It gives us a little bit of a reprieve. Some teachers believed and put into practice the idea that learning is something more than just following district standards. So now I'm transitioning, right, into the events. Okay. So watch this. In response to these conditions or these constraints, there were a few teachers and students, excuse me. There were a few teachers and students who chose to construct an alternative safe space where students develop their voices and sharpen their skills with language creatively and intelligently. Learning in this environment was enacted through dialogue regarding issues of social and political inequality that persist in the inner city area in inner city areas, as well as issues regarding the roles of politics and art. Learning in these classes and in these situations was embraced more fully through the exchange of ideas and opinion rather than merely the absorption of weekly standards. For instance, here now I'm going specifically, right, into some events. Our 11th and 12th grade English teacher with an MA in composition and rhetoric named Thomas Lee opened his classroom in hopes of extending to students a forum where students could train, could create, and could expand our skills of expression and writing toward the goal of becoming leaders. Right. So here now I'm diving deep into his classroom. Now I want to take you directly into his classroom. I want to be able to describe it in a way that you could actually visualize and witness what it looked like, and hopefully by extension, what it felt like. Upon entering his classroom, you knew you were in a unique place. The pressure and tension between students and authority figures that was felt most thickly at the entrance of the school pervaded throughout that pervaded throughout the campus, but was released in room 305. The desks were positioned in a circle. All along the far wall were two striking posters over his workstation, Thomas's workstation, a black and white headshot of Malcolm X pointing in mid-speech with the words "by any means necessary" around the border of the frame, and another headshot of Ernesto Che Guevara outlined in black, in contrast to the red and black ground, strong, determined. To the right of his workstation was a display of student poetry, essays, and lyrics, which adorned the cabinet in a zigzag pattern facing the whiteboard. Circling back to the wall along the right of the entrance was an array of CD cover images from Les Nubians, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Erykah Badu, Public Enemy, Ice Cube, Nas, and dozens more. These are all hip hop artists or rappers, right? Particularly conscious rappers, right? Folks who were considered to be backpack rappers or conscious rappers, right? Although these are all rappers that have enjoyed, at least by now, certainly mainstream success, right? The collage was tightly organized so that no part of the white wall beneath it, right, which is a kind of blank space, right, a kind of abstract space, would show through its block formation, right? So he had the CD covers lined up in this kind of grid-like fashion, right? With no space in between. It was tight, right? The contrast provided provided by the white wall acted as a mat and gave a picturesque quality and feel to the collage in its center. Right? So behind it, right, all along the borders of this nicely tight, compact, gridded up wall of CD covers, the frame of it was a white background, right? Right? When combined with the display of student work and revolutionary figures and images and vigor, um, when combined with the display of student work and revolutionary figures and images, uh, this feel, right, this collage invigorated the classroom with curiosity, excitement, and energy. Thomas was one of the few teachers who decorated his classroom with art that had a deep and cultural resonance with the students. But this wasn't decoration for the sake of making his class look cool. In the students who frequented his sanctuary, he saw the opportunity to guide, to nourish, and to facilitate potential leaders, right? So, boom, that's like kind of the first description of the first event that I want to give to y'all, right? And I'm describing his space, right? And there's a lot that I'm packing into that description, but it also helps to set up the next event that actually follows, right? So, on any given day, one might find up to 12 students in his class during fourth period just after lunch. Sometimes they would sit quietly and read or work on other class assignments when there weren't many students present. There, however, when there were, we would spark discussion, have debates, which were very lively, right? Which were always lively, regarding issues of racial inequality, the falsification of African American consciousness, as well as political resistance and unity among Black and Brown folks, right, in inner city neighborhoods. Composing his room with posters of Malcolm and Che spoke to the importance of linking grassroots causes together to create a global network of change against the forces of racial oppression, domination, and falsification of consciousness, right? The collage of rappers, MCs, and singers laid before students a path to build and serve a larger community through the avant-garde forms of expression found at the heart of hip hop. His class provided a training ground for students seeking relief from the stress and mental anguish of the cat and mouse chaos that greeted us every morning and loomed over us throughout most of the day. So here, what you're witnessing is I'm actually analyzing, right, the description that I actually provide above. Okay, right. So if this here is the first event entering into Thomas's classroom, right, this here helps to kind of give a little bit more context, but even more so than that, it just helps to kind of explain some of those elements that I introduce above, right? We'll continue on. Governed by a sense of inspiration and respect. This is when we begin to move into the second event. We would release our anger and our stress by engaging in what hip hop heads referred to as battles, training our mental agility and writing skills by going back and forth with each other in a kind of lyrical format. Thomas's class became a training ground to exercise and develop skills in linguistic wordplay through the use of similes, metaphors, allusions, punchlines, and image making language. Right against the proper uses of school's computers, my classmates would download songs from Napster. Don't, by the way, folks, don't laugh at how old I am. This is way back in the days. I'm not even sure if any of y'all know what a Napster is, but before the luxury that you all actually live in, which is called iTunes, Spotify, or Tidal and YouTube Music and all that stuff. All right, we used to have to download music illegally if we wanted to get some songs, folks. But I digress. That was just a little side note that I wanted to share with y'all. Just a little bit of context for that, right? Okay. So, but see here, the thing that I also too want to just kind of point out too as well is sometimes your readers may or may not kind of catch the references, and that's okay. But if you provide enough context clues within the description itself, right, then they can at least get the general gist, and then they can continue on with the flow of their reading. You see? So here, right, I'm just saying, right, against the proper uses of the school's computers, my classmates would download songs from Napster. So you got to at least figure, hey, well, whatever a Napster is, it's a place or it's a thing where you can download some songs from, right? So we download songs from Napster and we kick freestyles and also pre-written, right, to different rap artists' songs or their beats, right? Like AC Alone's Accepted Electric, Talib Kweli's The Blast, Jay-Z and Pharrell's Give It to Me, right? In his class, it was in his class where we first formed our own safe space of resistance and education, our own Hush Harbor, right? Our own Hush Harbor collective that we called Emerge, which stood for Elevated Minds Embracing Righteousness and Gaining Equality. Boom, that's event number 2, right? So notice here, right? See, in here, right now, and I'm glad I actually kind of showed you all this because this here is like the kind of process, right? So notice how I'm going through event number 1, right? And it's not like a clearly demarcated line between like event number 1 and event number 2, but there's all this kind of one continuous flow because there's really one place that I'm really focused on, but multiple events or a sequence of events that occurs within this space, right? So, boom, we enter into Thomas's class. Then, next, boom, we're freestyling and battling, right? Then, next, boom, we end up actually forming our own group from the folks who come in there who are regulars, right? Emerge sought to challenge injustice, right? This here's the group that we ended up actually creating and the identity that we established ourselves based on, right? Emerge sought to challenge injustice and raise social political awareness in both local and global communities, right? And was developed by students, right? So not only were students able to, so here, right, you can kind of see there's a little bit of a break, right? No punctuation that's here. So now these here are just some ideas that I'm kind of like leaving in place that I need to go back and revisit and then develop and further flesh out. So what we're about to actually kind of transition into is, so this here is a draft. This is not a finished product right here. This here was actually one of my drafts for what became my finished product. I can certainly show you what my finished product looked like if you all are actually interested in seeing that. However, I do want to highlight for y'all, because we're at this stage of the first step in the writing process, right? The outline, right? And kind of like putting words together on paper, drafting it. That sometimes this is what your paper looks like when it's in progress. Okay. It's not always just a super duper polished kind of thing. No, right? Even for your professor here, you're looking at one of my drafts of this essay right here, right? You're looking at like these ideas that don't quite really make sense. Why don't they make sense? It's because I'm leaving these ideas back in here for when I come back to revise. Revision is probably the most important strategy that any of us could actually use, or that any professional writer, that all professional writers use, except for Lil Wayne, in order to make their essays or make their text, make whatever piece it is that they're composing to make it better, right? So let's take a look here, right? See, so I have some pieces here, right? Not only were students able to kick in and meet up in Thomas's class, right, but it was a space where we began to think critically about the connection between the context in which we lived and our lived experiences in a classroom environment, right? The collective of students coming from diverse backgrounds and cultural experiences pushed their mental agility, expanded their capacity for creative and rhetorical wordplay. The development of me and my friends' critical consciousness paralleled the development of our writing skills. So this here is where I'm going with this description here, right? So what are we doing here in Emerge, right? So in Emerge, right, all these things here, now I have to find a way to kind of tie these things here together, right? And continue on describing how it is that our work together as folks who are part of Emerge impacted the community, right? And how it ended up developing our writing skills, okay? Right? So here you can kind of see, right, Thomas's class, that section above, right? Let's go back up here. Upon entering his classroom, right, you knew you were in a unique space, right? This whole section right here, right? This is Thomas's class. This is the Thomas's class section, right? This was my outline, right? Locate, location, it should be in the classroom space. What did you do in there? How did he prepare you for college / the world? What songs, texts, readings, or materials did you engage in that class, right? Give us the scenes. And why was this important to you, right? These are my very own notes, folks, okay? I'm not just showing you just the finished product, right? But I think that it's actually important for me to show you the steps on how I actually got there, right? And so mind you, this came after I had kind of written all the way up into a certain point, right? I kind of freestyled this essay all the way up until this point, right? And so when I went back to revise, then I went back to revise it in certain spurts, right? So I went back to the section just after I make the transition from introducing Thomas to describing his class. I kept these notes right here because these are here were some of the questions that I felt like readers might want to know in order to understand the why this thing here was important for us, right? Okay. So I'm going to pause right there because I recognize that it's 7:30, folks. Let me take a pause for the cause, and just begin to wrap this here on up. Does this kind of help to provide a clearer snapshot of not only what you're doing, but also at least the first couple of steps for how to actually kind of get there? Okay, cool. Good, good, good. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Yes. Please, yes. So if you I want to just kind of pause right now, just open up the floor. Let's open up some dialogue, for some dialogue and some discussion. I'm going to start my screen here, and then any questions that y'all may have, please definitely join us. Can we reuse some of the sentences in our personal statement if they're relevant to our memoir? When you say your personal statement, you mean the personal statement chart, the discussion board number two? Got you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 I wouldn't necessarily take the like the exact same sentences, right? But I would elaborate on them, right? Or kind of remix them in some kind of way, but use it as a starting point, right? Kind of like training wheels on a bike, right? Eventually, right? Training wheels, you start riding your bike enough, and training wheels get busted and you got to take them off, right? So um, you may want to start there, right? But I wouldn't end with those same sentences, right? Unless they were like kind of elaborated on and like kind of remixed and reinterpreted to flow better in the story, because those were sentences that were written for a discussion board post, which is different from sentences that are written in an essay, right? So I would just kind of keep that in mind. But certainly, you can. That's the idea. That's the goal. I want you to take some of those ideas that you started describing in the discussion board. I want you to take some of those ideas and begin now to rework them into your essays. Excellent job. Let's see. What other questions do we have coming through? Excellent job. Yeah, no, no, of course. And help me out. Tell me, correct me, please. Is it Eisel or Azel? The first one or the second one? Azel. Got you. Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure because I realized that I was verbalizing your name, but I didn't actually ask for confirmation for the correct pronunciation. So thank you for correcting me on that. And if in the future, if you join and I end up kind of slipping into ISIL, just remind me to put that comment on in the chat and just say CAG, the second one. Absolutely, absolutely, Hazel, absolutely. Um, yeah, so that's super dope. Yeah. You're thinking about writing about an event that's way in the past. That's perfectly fine. This could be in the past, as in 5 seconds ago, or 5 minutes ago, 5 days ago, 5 months ago, or even 5 years ago, right? Um, as long as it's a significant event that occurred in your life that led to the transformation of how it is that you see yourself in the world around you. Excellent job. Yeah, please do that. I don't want you to think about writing this essay from the perspective and the standpoint of, what can I do? What can't I do? Right? I don't want you to write from that space because that's very restrictive. Y'all see how I am about education and restriction. I'm kind of sort of not really with that, right? But I do certainly but I do certainly believe in what we would call a minimal rigid structure, right? So it means that there's going to be some structure, there's going to be some direction, it's going to be very minimal, right? Why? Because similar to a bowl, and I see your question, Hazel. All right, similar to a bowl that's empty, right? That's an example of a kind of minimal rigid structure. It's a bowl, right? It's not that many pieces to it. It's solid. But the significance about that bowl is that it's empty. If you have an empty bowl, that means you can pour new content into it. So that's the kind of idea, right? That's the thinking that goes into the assignment prompt, and also that I want to highlight for you all. Right? I don't want you to be constrained or confined by, the perceived kind of rules, right? Okay, hey, well, hey, what can I do, right? What can't I do? Right? I want you to write this essay, right? Go to the PowerPoints and the lectures to see what the rules are, right? Or rather, what the ingredients actually are, right? And then you get to actually make this dish into something creative, something brand new, a new version of an old school dish that we may or may not have actually heard of before. If we can't remember all the details, do we do our best to include the ones that we do recall? You know what? So here's the cool thing, Azel, about critical memoir, and the reason why I love it so much. There is a such thing as creative license, right? So I want you to do your best to actually fill in the gaps. The thing about the memoir is that it does not have to be, it's not a historical document. It's not nonfiction, right? Meaning that there can be some parts that are, again, like under the condition that you're describing, where you don't actually remember, right? There's some parts that can be creatively reinterpreted, right? For not only your audience, but also too for fulfilling the purpose of your message. Okay. Right. So I want you to actually kind of navigate your way through that, right? And exercise some of your skills as the expert in what happened in your life. Here's a quiet secret. I don't know what really happened in your life and what really didn't. And I'm not saying that to say just make up a whole bunch of stuff. I'm saying that to say you're the only person who really would know in response to your question. Your readers wouldn't be able to tell. Does that make sense? That's available for everybody, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. Other questions? Other questions? Man, I need to figure out how to. I need to figure out how to how to how to bring people up from the chat. Or how to bring on like kind of special guests. Based on the example, the paragraphs can be as short as 3 good sentences. Based on which example? So not quite. I mean, I want you to think about. Don't worry about like the sentence length so much of the paragraphs. Okay, right. I would much rather you consider and think about this from the perspective, think about how long or short um you want to actually make the paragraphs throughout your sentences. I want you to think about it in this context here. So let me just kind of break this down a little bit more. I'm gonna dive on in, and that's a great question, really. Right, so like take for example the introduction. The intro should be about 1 paragraph, right? So notice that this here is a section right? And sections are different from paragraphs. Um, each paragraph fits within to a section, right? But it doesn't work in reverse, right? Sections don't fit into paragraphs. It's the opposite, right? Sections are like a city. Excuse me, sorry. Sections are like a state, right? Paragraphs are like the cities that exist within those states, right? So for this particular paragraph, there's no need to actually make it, or for this particular section of your essay, there's no need to have multiple paragraphs because you want to actually convey the background, the setting, the introduction into the conflict, and the central idea as a part of one coherent city, right? Slash state. However, this is another section, right? Section 2 in the essay, the body paragraphs. And this section here should not be all one paragraph, but rather it should be multiple paragraphs. Why? Because this is the body section, right? This is a state that has multiple cities in it, right? It depends on how many main events you actually have. If you have one large event, right? Well, you can break that event up based on either what happens and what was said, right? Or the people who you talk to within that one event, or if it's a section that describes a series of events, then you can break up the paragraphs based on each event. Okay. So I need you to actually think dynamically here, right? About the relationship between sections and paragraphs, as opposed to thinking about um, how many sentences do I need to finish this paragraph, right? This is college level writing, so it's a lot different from what it is that we may have been exposed to in high school writing, right? And one of the major differences is that shift right there, right? The shift from thinking on the word and sentence level to thinking on the paragraph and theme level, okay? Or the paragraph and section level, right? So I want us to expand our perception of the scales or the levels in which writing occurs in our essays. All right. So that's how I would kind of respond to that question, Azel. Does that kind of help? Is that pretty clear? Does that make sense? Perfect. Excellent. Right. And then similarly, right? So if the body paragraph section contains multiple paragraphs, right? But the intro only contains one paragraph, right? So the intro contains one paragraph, the body section contains multiple paragraphs because it's a lot more detail oriented, right? The conclusion, in which you have the resolution, right? Where you talk about your overall message to your audience, that only needs to be one paragraph as well, similar to the introduction, right? So there's a link between the intro and the conclusion, right? In fact, I'll tell y'all a little trick. Yes, yes, yes. Excellent. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that, Azel. Right. It is better to develop the ideas of the sections rather than to focus on the word or the sentence counts. Right. I don't even want y'all to think about, well, how many sentences do I need? Well, do I need two more sentences? Right. I don't even want y'all to think about that. Right. Okay. And the reason why I'm highlighting that, right, or pointing that out is because Azel, you're not the first person to even bring that up as a consideration. Right. A lot of my students often, I can't even tell you how often they think about or they're overwhelmed and preoccupied with, okay, well, do I have enough sentences, right? No, 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 because that actually sets you up to write from a place of fear. And again, I'm not doing that, right? I don't want you guys to do that either. I don't want y'all to write from a place of fear. Remember, y'all are the experts here, right? Write this story, write what you consider to be too much, okay? Right? What you consider to be too much. And I want you to dive in at the level of detail that you would consider to be too much, right? Because what you consider to be too much right now at this point in time is just enough, right? Because What you can do when you have too much, let's say that you write over 5 pages. That's great. Now you have something to cut back on. And when you cut back, you only want to keep the best parts or revise sections, collapse them, right, into better versions of themselves, right? It's easier for you to cut away as opposed to not have enough and have to write some more, right? It's easier for you to have too many ideas and to cut them back as opposed to having not enough ideas, right? Not enough sections actually developed and then having to develop them, especially at the last minute, right? Excellent job. Yeah. Here, I'll tell y'all a little trick, right? I'll make this as my last point. If I have any more questions, please feel free to flood the chat. If you have any more questions, please feel free to flood the chat. While I'm waiting on some of those questions to come on in, I'll let y'all into a little secret with a little bit of story time. All right. So, story time with CAG. so, after I kind of, got through that class that I was telling y'all about, 17th century restoration, and I went ahead on and I passed a couple more English classes. I stick with that formula, right? I'm going to meet the teachers, I'm making friends with the TA, I'm forming study groups, right? I'm rocking, I'm rolling, I'm getting a little bit better, I'm getting a little bit better and better and better and better. There's a nasty habit that I have of waiting until midnight, the midnight before the paper is actually due. So let's say that the paper is due Sunday at 11:59 p.m., I would have a habit of waiting until Saturday at 12 o'clock to start the essay, right? And then I would kind of just freestyle the whole thing, okay? Right? And then I would turn it in and I would get a B, right? Rarely would I get a C. I get B's, A's, right? I'm like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah, I'm all right. I'm kind of cool. I'm kind of nice, right? Shoot, man, I'm all right. Until I got a professor who was really good. Like, I mean, like this professor was gifted. This professor was a professor. You see that happen too, huh? Right? Until you meet the professor who actually takes the time to sit down and really engage with your ideas. I had a professor who did that for me, right? And I actually wrote the essay a lot earlier, right? And I had a chance to go and sit down with them in office hours. And man, see, most people are actually used to seeing corrections on their paper, little, not that word, right? Cross out that word, right? Cross that word. Oh, hey, you misspelled this word right here, right? Oh, oh my gosh. This is so funny, right? Great comment, right? Yeah, that's what I was used to. Okay, right. You're used to, I mean, like if anything, right? Professor might actually kind of like draw a line through a word, right? Maybe like through a couple of sentences at most, right? Okay, well, I sat down with the professor who really, really took the time out to read my work. And let me tell you, there is a huge, almost demoralizing difference between crossing a word out here or there, making your cross outs east to west, right? Huge difference between making cross outs east to west, right? Horizontally versus making cross outs from north to south. I had a professor who did that to me one time. Well, he did it to me a lot of times. And I ended up having a lot of professors who did it later too, as well. But let me tell you, the way that it felt like I got hit in my chest and all of the air that I thought I owned in my lungs just, whoa, what are you doing? He took one page, first page, crossed it out, turned to the next page, drew another line down the center of the paper, right? Next page, down the center of the paper. Next page, down the center of the paper, all the way until I got to the last page. And here's what he told me. And this here's the trick that I want to actually share with y'all. He took and he drew a line, started at the top, stop, right at the halfway mark of the page. And then he told me, he said, Your conclusion is really good. You should actually take and make this your first paragraph. Make this your introduction. Rewrite your essay from there, right? So, to kind of reemphasize and reiterate the point that I made just a second ago about how there's a connection between the intro, or rather, there should be a connection between the intro and the conclusion. That's where I learned that from, right? So, what I would do is I would actually take and I would freestyle my entire essay, but what I learned how to do from that moment, after I ended up actually, kind of like, regaining my scruples about me, right? After I left that professor's office hours and, kind of found my way somehow stumbling back home because I was so disoriented. It felt like I got, knocked upside the head, like I was in a 12-round boxing match with Mike Tyson and I only lasted one round. Um, after I kind of got my scruples about me, what I ended up discovering was, oh, okay, heck yeah. So like I can kind of like, write my essays, right, all the way through. And then at the end, I need to actually do this revision move of taking my conclusion, putting it up to the first part of my essay, and then revising my essay from there, right? Or just straight up rewriting my essay from there. Because now I have this set of notes that I could actually pull from and I could rearrange these ideas, but I have a strong paragraph, right? That's the introduction. And by starting your essay off with the conclusion of your first draft, right? It's a game changer. It's a game changer. Check it out, try it, experiment with it. Y'all, I want y'all to have fun with writing, okay? Listen, I know y'all signed up for class and I know y'all might have actually been at least engaged in school for like a minimum of 13 years. And here I'm thinking about from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And you might not have ever had a day where you considered to be fun, where y'all wasn't playing games and stuff like that in the classroom, right? Y'all might not have ever had a day like that in the classroom. However, writing should be fun, okay? As a matter of fact, it's better when it's fun. So I want y'all to play. I want y'all to experiment with these things, right? Experiment with some of these tips, tricks, and strategies that I've shared with y'all in today's YouTube live. Okay. Listen, hey, the sky is the limit. As a matter of fact, actually, really, there are no ceilings where y'all are headed to. Okay. Don't think about if whether or not what you're doing is kind of right or wrong. Do it, read it, get some other people to actually read it for you and ask them how this flows. Does this make sense? Does this idea connect up with the one that follows? And am I following the trajectory, or am I following the framework, the guideline that's listed out, right? The outlining kind of guideline, the minimal rigid structure that's provided in the narrative structure PowerPoint that Professor Cag has provided for us, right? Okay. Ask yourselves that. That'll help to give you a good sense of you being in the right direction. All right, folks. Well, ladies and gents, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. This here is your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag. If there are no more questions, then I do want to actually conclude our time. Goodness gracious, folks, we have had a 2-hour live that I only meant to be 1 hour. I will get better at this. And I will get better and better and better. I promise, because I'm going to work really hard at doing these YouTube lives in a much better format for y'all. I don't typically want to take up 2 hours of your time, but I felt like it was kind of necessary. It might even be necessary just for the times where we have to actually do some coaching and some guiding on writing, how to write the essay. Okay, ladies and gents, thank you so much. Please feel free to schedule an office hours appointment with me if you have a draft of your essay. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Excellent. Good. I'm so glad that y'all found this to be helpful. I will repost this entire live on our Canvas. It'll be underneath modules week 3. And I'll also post it up in our announcement. So if you want to come back and just kind of revisit some things, you can scroll. You'll know exactly how to kind of scroll through the entire YouTube, right? So you can get to the parts that you need to. But man, please join me for my next YouTube live. I will send out an announcement through Canvas to let y'all know what the schedule actually looks like. And man, join me every time as much as you can. Schedule an office hours appointment with me if you want me to read over your stuff. and I definitely will. Okay, we can sit down together, go over it. I can give you some live feedback before the essay is due during my office hours. Okay, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. All right, folks, y'all take care, and y'all have a good night. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Peace.